topic of the Symposium. Today he's going to speak about the Chicago.
Shalom, Toda. So no, I know a few. I know Ani Maflitz, and I know Bibi Melech Yisrael. So most of the talks have been kind of theoretical. This is going to be much more practical. The other thing, until the last talk by Natalie, most of them have been sort of diagnostic. This is going to be more prescriptive towards the future. Things that I think, ways to try to deal with this problem. So a group of us have this term, the Chicago Trifecta, which is for the Calvin Report, Schill's Report, and Chicago Principles, all at the University of Chicago. So I'm going to talk about these. All of these were general principles that you would recognize in academic institutions, and were certainly a part of the University of Chicago culture. And they were only written down when those principles were challenged. And so the Calvin Report is about basically saying the university doesn't have a role in political and social action, and that was written down because of the Vietnam War, and people were demanding action. The Schill's Report basically says you can only make appointments based on academic skills, and you can see why that would have come up in the 1970s. And the Chicago Principles is a response to the onset of wokeism, which basically says you can say students and faculty can make whatever academics they want, even if someone says they're offended. So here's the outline of the talk. I'm going to talk about the Chicago Trifecta. In particular, it lays out very clearly the definition of a university and the purpose of a university. And then it goes through these 3 points made in the 3 reports that you can see there. And then getting on to, I think that should be the goal for dealing with this problem, getting this, something like these three reports adopted and enforced at all institutions. And so the next part is sort of ways that we can make that happen. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about what's been going on at U.Chicago, and we've had some successes, so it may be interesting to people. So the first part is the definition of a university. So this is from a former president, Hutchins, which I really like. A university is a community of scholars. It is not a kindergarten. It's not a club. It is not a reform school. It is not a political party. It is not an agency of propaganda. A university is a community of scholars. And I think that's a really good definition. And the idea of a university having a social or political role, or academics being activists, is really contrary to this idea of a university. And then you can see this makes its way into the Calvin Report 30 years later, that basic concept. And I think the reason it's important to mention kindergarten is because a kindergarten is a safe space, right? So it's fine if you want to make an argument about people should all feel welcome at a kindergarten, but that's not what a university is. Similarly, a club, if you have a men's club and someone does something to embarrass the club, then you could kick them out of the men's club, but that's not what a university is. Oh, and I should mention reform school. So like some people are proposing reforms to education that would make a university into a sort of a reform school. Like, we're going to teach people how to think about certain issues so that they can behave in a socially acceptable way. And he sort of spots all of these potential ways you could go and says, that's not what we are. Okay, now the purpose of the university. The mission of the university is the discovery, improvement, and dissemination of knowledge. I think that basically summarizes it pretty well. You can also expand a bit and say that it's the discovery of knowledge or research, the communication of knowledge to students, and also the training of students, both of which are education. So it's basically research and education. There's a nice little quote at the bottom from Rick Schwader at this Stanford conference that was mentioned by Sergio. One interesting thing to note, so Nathalie said, in the U.S., the anti-woke movement is a little behind, and Sergio said, oh, we had this conference. I don't think there was such a response to the Paris conference as there was to the Stanford conference. So we had we had pressure internal from Stanford University that forced some of the groups that were providing money to back out. We eventually found other groups, and we had 50 faculty at Stanford sign a letter saying that this conference shouldn't happen at Stanford because, you know, we were going to discuss academic freedom. It was actually very funny because one of their complaints was that it was a closed conference that they couldn't be at, but we had invited about half the signatories to come at the conference, and they refused because they said, I won't be associated with X, Y, Z, terrible person. So it was a little silly. But anyways, here's this comment from Rick Schwader. And what were the parts I liked? It is not the role of the university to directly respond to the needs of the broader worlds of politics and commerce, or to be popular with the general public. And the true mission of an academic institution is intellectual, not moral. Okay, so now we're getting to the first sort of principle. So I'm starting with the most recent one, really, which is that the university has to guarantee absolute freedom of expression. So I don't think I need to make this case very strongly in this audience, but this is certainly has to be part of, in my opinion, the response to the woke project. So just because someone says that you're saying something that harmed me or that harmed an underprivileged person or a person with a high intersectional score, that doesn't mean that you should not say it. Now, the university can regulate the time and place, but only sort of the time and place. Another important aspect of this is that your right to free speech on campus doesn't entail acts to shut down other people's speech. So this doesn't guarantee that you have the right to go to someone else's seminar and yell with a bullhorn. So that's an important distinction. This is a much less known principle, that the university cannot make collective statements on social and political issues. So the instrument of dissent and criticism is the individual faculty member or the individual student. The university is the home and sponsor of critics. It is not itself the critic. So sometimes when you bring up this point, a common rhetorical response is, I thought we were for academic freedom. You're for academic freedom, but now you're saying, you know, this department or university doesn't have academic freedom. But the point is that departments and universities don't have academic freedoms. Academics have academic freedom. And that's an important distinction to make. And the reason for this is that the university is a community which cannot take collective action on the issues of the day without endangering the conditions for its existence and effectiveness. There's no mechanism by which it can reach a collective position without inhibiting the full freedom of dissent on which it thrives. So if Ben-Gurion University says, we believe the IPCC report and anyone who disagrees is a dum-dum, then they're saying basically that Jonathan is a dum-dum and shouldn't be making his arguments on campus. So that's just a simple example. Yeah. Okay, and the point of this is to encourage the freedom of discussion. So it's a type of humility. You're basically saying the university administration has to show humility in these debates so that a full and vigorous debate can occur with all sides represented. Okay, now the university must make appointments on the basis of academic merit alone. This one has become extremely important in the woke movement. So one important point of the woke movement is called entryism. And so the idea is that if you can control who enters the profession, then on a decadal timescale, you can come to dominate and alter the profession. And that's something that's being actively used with things like DEI statements. And the Shills report is actually the main reason that the University of Chicago is one of the only universities that explicitly prohibits DEI statements or statements of fidelity to this ideology that have to be made in order to even be considered for a position. So the function of appointive bodies is to bring to the academic staff of the university individuals who perform at the highest level the functions of research, teaching, and training, and the maintenance of the intellectual community of the university. A university which does not perform at this level will lose its standing in the world and therewith its power to attract outstanding faculty members and outstanding students. Its failure to attract them will in turn reduce the quality of its performance. Every appointment of a mediocre candidate makes it more difficult to bring outstanding students to the university. So, I mean, we could all see this happening around us. This middle statement makes it even more explicit. You can't take into account sex, ethnic or national characteristics, political, religious beliefs, affiliations, blah, 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 in any decision regarding appointment, promotion, or reappointment at any level of academic staff. An important sort of subsidiary point here is that not only is this a violation of the Shills report to do this, but it would also be a violation of the Calvin report, because you're essentially making a political statement. We value this group of people more than this other group of people. So you've left the realm of abstract search for truth, and you're now participating in the social and political process. And you can all, I'm sure all of you have seen this happen, being on some sort of committee that was supposed to decide something, and people say, well, we want an underrepresented person to get this award or be hired. And then the debate becomes, do we want an LGBT person, or do we want a woman, or do we want a Hispanic person or a Black person? And so it just becomes a political debate of which underrepresented group is most deserving, rather than a debate of the scientific merits. Okay, so I think that's the goal, that's the objective, and now how to get there. So all of us have to speak up. This is step number one. Can form groups locally, student and faculty groups, and they should coordinate across campuses and across continents. One thing that, so even on campus, so in the general population, the woke are about 5%, 1 in 20. They know they can't win elections. And so what they do is they try to infiltrate powerful organizations and change things that way. On campus, there may be a higher percentage, but it's still not a majority. And so you can be depressed that a minority has gotten so much power and changed the way things work, but you can also see that as an opportunity. It means that a relatively small number of us, if we're willing to defend academic freedom, and we're very obstinate about it, we could have a big impact. The other thing is, we can't just complain about it and not do anything. Or, I mean, we can, but we'd be losers. So we shouldn't do that. And the final thing is, I think it's really important to talk to journalists. So whenever a journalist emails me or calls me, I agree to talk to them, basically, with a few exceptions if it gets too busy. And that includes people who are anathema to the progressive left. So if someone's willing to talk to me and have a meaningful conversation and treat me respectfully, I'll talk to them. And it doesn't matter if they've talked to other people who someone doesn't like, blah, blah, blah. And I think that this is important because a lot of people just don't even realize what's going on. And so that message has to get out to the general public in order for anything to change. Okay, I think alumni associations are a huge strength. So I had this lecture canceled at MIT. It was a lecture on exoplanets, and it was canceled because I had written an article arguing that academic appointments should be made on the basis of merit rather than identity characteristics. And after that, the alumni revolted. They formed a group called MIT Alumni for Free Speech, and the provost and president of MIT resigned. So, it can have, the alumni have a big impact. And the main reason is that they give money, and they can say, we're not going to give money. And in fact, hundreds of them wrote me and said, I'm not giving money to MIT anymore. And then that gets people nervous at the institution. So anything that you can do to work with these groups, interface with them, and help them in what they're doing, I think is useful. And then political action. So I am not a political person. I don't know how this should work, but I do know that something should be tried. Here are a couple ideas I have. So in the US, we have these things called Title VI and Title IX related to the US Civil Rights Act. And the basic idea is if a university gets federal funding, it has to be consistent with the Civil Rights Act. And Title VI says you can't discriminate on the basis of race, and Title IX says you can't discriminate on the basis of sex. And so why not have a Title X, which says you have to have the Chicago Trifecta, implemented and enforced, or else you can't get federal funding. It's just an idea. A related issue is that you could require an office responsible for promoting academic freedom on campus. So I've given up on the idea that we're going to get rid of the bureaucrats and administrators in U.S. institutions. I just want some of them doing something productive rather than all of them doing something negative. And so maybe you could add some bureaucrats to fight the other bureaucrats. And then maybe they'll be so distracted fighting each other that they won't bother us and we can actually do science. So that's the dream. And then here's a wacky idea. So at MIT, when this talk was canceled, you could argue that MIT had sort of violated its contractual obligation to the students at MIT because they had promised them an education and they're not delivering that education. So you could write laws that would enable any student where such an incident occurred to sue the university to recover their tuition for that year. And I think if you had laws like that, then that would probably change the university's attitude towards academic freedom quickly. So these are just some ideas. But the more important point is that there has to be some interface with the politicians, because the reason I'm talking about alumni and I'm talking about politics and talking to journalists is the reality is the woke people are really entrenched in positions of power in the universities. And so I'm not super optimistic that it's going to be reformed from within. And so there has to be some pressure from outside to make it happen. Now, a few things about successes at U.Chicago. The first is we have a group. I mentioned it's a good idea to found these groups called U.Chicago Free. We've got 50 members. If you want to be in the group, you got to agree to this statement and you have to allow your name and affiliation to be publicly listed. We are a nonpartisan group of faculty seeking to preserve the unique intellectual environment of the University of Chicago. We value curiosity, open inquiry, free expression, and debate. We believe that intellectual excellence is the ultimate goal of the university. We advocate for academic freedom and political independence as expressed in the Chicago Principles and the Calvin Report. So it's pretty impressive, I think, that 50 people are willing to agree to that, because this basically can get you blacklisted. And in fact, we've had attacks where a woke activist at the university, he went on every, it's not Signal, it's that Slack. He went on every Slack channel in the university that a member of our group was a member of, and he emailed them and said, this person is a member of this group that's anti-social justice. Explain yourself to your colleagues. And then he would say, I'm a Black academic, and their principles of academic neutrality are leading to racism that's threatening my life. And then he posted all that on Twitter too. So, the fact that 50 people are still willing to be part of it, I think is impressive. What we do in the group is we have a listserv where we sort of consider ourselves like the rapid action force on campus for these issues. So anytime anything comes up, we talk about it on the listserv. We email the people involved who are getting attacked, and we email the relevant deans and say, like, look, here's our university commitments. Don't make a statement condemning this person, et cetera, et cetera. We've also written letters to the administration on various issues, and we've met with the administrations, with the president and the provost about a number of issues, some of which I'm going to talk about here. So now I'm going to show you something that was broken at U.Chicago that we helped to get back in order. So since 1967, and even before that, the university hadn't made any statements on social and political issues. And then in the summer of 2020, which was the summer of civil disorder in the US, departments, provosts, everybody across all sorts of units started making statements. And there were statements that were very explicitly calling on action from members of the community. So for example, white people must join as allies with people of color in condemning racist rhetoric and race-based violence and policies, and work as committed partners in action and organizing. Some of them even said that we all need to work together to identify and eliminate any individual racism within our department. During this time, there was a campaign against me before I got in trouble at MIT for advocating similar things. And there was a letter of I guess, denunciation signed by about half of the grad students in my department against me, which said, so I was advocating for universalist principles and colorblindness, that I should not be allowed to teach or advise graduate students, and that everybody in the department should be interviewed, all the faculty, and it should be determined who has similar views to mine, and then all of us should go into a re-education program to make sure that we didn't continue with those views. So this is the kind of thing that happens when you get statements like this from the department chair. All of a sudden, the grad students think that, you know, they could just run with it. Okay, and solidarity. Solidarity, this is completely opposite of what a university is supposed to be about. It doesn't have solidarity on stuff. It's things are supposed to be debated with people having different perspectives. And then there was one letter in particular that expressed certainty about a lot of issues that should be the subject of debate. So we're certain that the deaths, and they list a few people, are the result of a system that encourages state-supported erasure of Black life. We're certain that the system must be dismantled. We're certain that American policing fails. We're certain that reforming the police system is not the answer, but, you know, we need to defund the police. Did somebody say defund the thought police this morning? Where did I hear that? Anyways, that's a good, I actually like that one. Defund the thought police instead of defund the police. Maybe I heard that somewhere else. Yeah. Okay, but the point is that they're basically saying, I mean, these are really detailed policy prescriptions. It's not even a general vague social issue that's being argued. So this is obviously a huge problem. And then once this started in the summer of civil disorder, it just mushroomed and ballooned. And every time anything happened, there was sort of a sure pattern. A bunch of people would write something on Twitter, like they would, you know, in Twitter it says trending stories. Well, the trending story in Chicago would be Adam Toledo got shot by the police. And then the next morning we would have a statement from the provost and from our dean and from our department chair. So that first the provost would do it, and then the deans would be like, oh, we better do it. And then department chairs, well, we better do it. Some of these issues, so were completely separate from University of Chicago. Like this issue of Asian violence against people of Asian descent. Of course, I'm against violence against people of Asian descent, but no people of Asian descent at the University of Chicago were subjected to violence. No one even in Chicago. It was like in New York City, there was somebody attacked. It wasn't clear if it was because they were Asian or not. It just trended on Twitter. And so they had to make a statement. You know, this issue of violent group overrun the Capitol building. I see that as a problem because there's all kinds of violent things happening. We just had a whole summer with violent riots that were not condemned. And then they decide they're going to do this one, which wasn't related to the university. And then, you know, we oppose specific U.S. Supreme Court cases, which seems totally beyond the pale to me. Okay. So what we did was we kept bothering. For 2 years, we bothered the president, actually two presidents, the old president and the new president. And we met 3 times with the new president. And they didn't want to do anything because they were worried about the response. And so I think basically they stalled us for 2 years. And they figured, you're right, but we'll stall you. And when things calm down, we'll take these statements down quietly. And that's basically what happened, which is better than nothing. So now we have a mechanism. There's a specific person in the administration that we can contact and say, this violates the Calvin report. They review it. And then they order the dean, the relevant dean, to take it off the university websites. And we've reported 10 and 9 of them have been taken down, which is a pretty good rate. So this is the sort of thing that you can do if you get organized. You know, if 30 tenured professors write the president and say, we're really concerned about this issue, we want a half-hour meeting to talk to you about it, usually you're going to get to sit down with that person. Okay, another thing I've been working on, there's a guy named Mark Perry, who He's retired, and his big issue is Title VI and Title IX complaints. So it turns out that a lot of the woke programs are actually illegal. The woke people are so committed to their ideology that they can't actually believe that the stuff they're doing is illegal. And so we have a mechanism to respond to it. So here's an example of a complaint that I said. University's Deborah Ginn Fellowship is a single-sex, female-only program to bring more outstanding women into science. The fellowship will be given to an incoming female physics graduate student at the University of Chicago. In violation of Title IX and University of Chicago's non-discrimination policy that considers individual merit and not group identity, male physics majors are illegally excluded from this female-only program on the basis of sex. So a lot of these Title IX office people are going to be kind of in the woke camp. But if you get an honest one, they'll read this thing, and it's so obviously against the law that they will order it discontinued. And so I've reported, I guess, 11 of them. 8 of them have been discontinued. 1 of them, they disagreed with me, and 2, they're under investigation. So if you're in the U.S., you can file these things when you see a program only for one sex or only for certain races. Okay, and then the other thing is there's all these stupid committees, Soviets, I learned this morning. There's all these dumb Soviets that are a waste of time. And mostly it's like, sorry, humanities people, but it's like people in humanities who don't have anything better to do, go into them. And, most scientists are like, I just want to play with my supercomputer or my laser, leave me alone. Okay, but actually we have to go to these stupid meetings. And it turns out that you can get elected to a university senate with like 10 votes in most places because most people don't vote or pay attention. And so it's worth doing these. And so that's one thing we do at U-Chicago Free. Like every time there's election, we go on the listserv, hey, who will run? We get a few people to run, and then we get on these committees. And at the very least, you can make some noise, even if you can't change what happens. So that's worth doing. Okay, and then I run this heterodox STEM Substack. Some of you probably read it. Some of you have written for it. Please send me articles if you have things that you want to get out there. It's a way that you can use it as a draft, like the archive in physics. So you can post something on there, and then you can get it published in a more official place when you revise it and get comments. So I think that helps. It's developing a community of people who are opposed to this stuff. Conferences like this, thank you, Uta. You can write op-eds in national newspapers. So those are hard to get published sometimes, but often a university has administrators who can help you get stuff into those papers that they might not want to talk to you if you tell them the subject that you're writing on. But at least you can just say, oh, can you give me the emails for the people at New York Times and Wall Street Journal, and they'll give them to you, and then you can pitch it. You probably won't have 100% success, but if it doesn't get in there, you can always send it to me on Heterodox STEM. I think Twitter is actually useful. For one thing, because you meet people on there, but I think the biggest thing is just, if you post on Twitter and you say like, I don't believe it, I'm not going along with this stuff, it shows students that there's other people, that not everybody is going along with the stupidness. And also, lots of people are going to call you names and be mean, and if you just ignore it and show that it doesn't matter, it sort of diffuses their main weapon. I mean, that's the disturbing thing about this, is most of this problem is because a lot of important people are scared of being called names on Twitter. And if they just didn't give a crap, then we wouldn't be in this mess. Okay, there's lots of podcasts, radio, television. If someone asks you, go out there and tell the story. And then there are these Signal chat groups. So for example, we could make a Signal chat group for this, from everyone at this conference, and then we could share stuff in the future. And it's secret. Okay, so I think this is my last slide. So this is sort of the summary and the outlook. The goal, the objective should be this Chicago trifecta, in my opinion. I don't think these laws where you try to like go against critical race theory, blah, 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 should be the goal. We don't need to necessarily keep the CRT people from saying they're nonsense. We just need to be able to point out that it's nonsense. an important point here is that this is a direct challenge to the woke project. A lot of big corporations, a lot of fancy presidents of universities, and a huge DI bureaucracy are behind that. So there's a lot of people who are going to be mean to you and try to cause you trouble if you speak out against this. I don't think that should stop you, but everyone should be honest about that and ready to confront it, not sort of wishy-washy. Well, you know, I'm basically for DEI, just not when it goes this far or something. The whole thing is rotten and needs to be attacked, in my opinion. People are going to have to get off their butts. We can't just play with our lasers and supercomputers. I mean, we can do that 90% of the time, but we also have to say, we have to stand up and say, you know, this isn't how science is supposed to work. Because basically they're coming for us. So when I was an undergrad, I heard about all this ding-dong stuff in the cafeteria, and it was just funny. It was like, oh, this is what they're saying over in the gender studies department. That'll never happen in physics. I can just do my fun stuff and play with equations and it'll be great. But they came for us, you know, like we weren't insulated. We don't have this garden to play in. And so we got to protect the garden, or else, you know, if you just sit in your office doing your little stuff, in 10 years from now, you won't be able to do that. Okay, we got to get organized, talk to people, alumni, journalists, and politicians. And my personal feeling is that on a decadal time scale, it's possible that we can have a positive effect. I know not everyone agrees with me. If you really think there's no chance of having an effect, I don't see why you would even come to a meeting like this. But I do think that on a decadal timescale, we can resist some of this stuff and restore some sanity. We can make science great again. So that's it.